Okay, here we go. Last week of lessons. Get my microphone on. Fix the pen. Oops. All right, today we're going to do pages 209 to 211. And we're talking about adjectives. Adjectives that describe mostly nouns and pronouns. No, just nouns, not pronouns. I don't think so. Anyway, and then we have 3 different degrees of adjectives. So they're up here. We have positive, comparative, and superlative. Sorry, my voice is all crackly. It's early in the morning. All right. So when you're using adjectives just normally, if I were to say Gabe was a good football player, or we have many cookies in the back room, that would be called positive. Comparative, on the other hand, are adjectives when we are comparing 2 different things. All right. Factoryville is farther away than Meyer for me. So we use the word, we're going to talk about farther and further a little bit down the road here. Farther is when we can actually measure something with miles or a distance, inches, not inches. Yeah, I guess you could even do with that with farther. But when you can actually measure it. Further is when you're not really measuring it. And we'll look at that more. Superlative degree is when we're comparing 3 or more things. That is the worst tasting ice cream I've ever had. Or that is the farthest I've ever traveled. That is the most fun I've ever had. All right, so when we're comparing something with a bunch of other things, we would use superlative. And we'll look at these down at the bottom, okay? One more point right here. When do we use well and when do we use good? The problem with well and good is that we often speak it incorrectly. You might say you feel good, but that would be an incorrect use of the word. Well is the word you use when you're talking about how you feel, dealing with health. So you feel well today. All right? How do you feel? I feel well. You wouldn't say I feel good. We do say it. But if you're writing it especially, you want to use the word well for health. All right, let's look down at Think See. In the blank, write the correct form of the adjective in parentheses. Jermaine is the good speller in the class. So out of all the kids in the class, comparing to Jermaine, that would be superlative. He's the best. We give far consideration to your idea. Okay, so now here's the example of when do we use far and when do we use farther and further. For instance, in positive, you use far for both. And you can hear that, so you don't have to really worry about it so much. But in comparative, look up top, we have farther and further, farthest and furthest. If we can measure it, then we use farther. If we can't measure it, we use further. And if you look here, we give far consideration. This is not something we can actually measure. So we're comparing our idea to your idea, 2 things. So we would use further. And that one also can be heard. We say it correctly a lot. That was bad idea I've ever heard. Out of all the ideas I've ever heard, this one was the not baddest. We wouldn't say baddest. Look up top. Bad, worse, and worst. So we use worst. Haley's house is far down the road. So we would say farther. Now, even though it doesn't say it, it's understood it's farther down the road than something else. That's why you would use farther. And you can even just hear that one. Who sold the, you can hear this one, most candy out of everyone else, even though it's understood, it's not really stated. Andrew ran blank than all the other runners. So you're comparing Andrew to all the other runners, more than one more. So you would use, and we can measure that for sure. So we would say farthest, superlative. All right, skip this and let's go to the next page. All right, using adjectives correctly. Often people will say these things incorrect, but usually you can even hear that it doesn't make sense. You don't use the word more and ER. It's one or the other. So our house is smaller than the other house. And as a kind of a rule, I know in English there's always the exceptions, but if you have a one-syllable word, more often than not, you just add the ER. You don't use the more. For instance, you wouldn't say most biggest. First of all, you would never use both. You would never use the most and the EST. But big is only one syllable, so we're just going to add the EST to it. When comparing a person with a group of which the person is a member, use the other or the else in comparison. So she's friendlier than any other girl you want to put, because you're comparing her to a group. So you want to write the word other signifying the group. You wouldn't say Ella is friendlier than any girl in her class. This is one where we often say it incorrect. And we'll look at that down in these sentences a little bit. She is more studious than anyone in her class. You would say more studious than anyone else. So use the word other or else when you're comparing a person with a group. All right. So this is an example too, where you have a word friendly, which is more than one syllable. And you still add the ER. You can almost always hear it, actually. Use fewer or fewest with items that cannot be counted, and use less or least with quantity of a substance. I think did we talk about this, or did I talk about with the fifth graders? I can't remember. I'm having a hard time waking up this morning. Fewer or fewest, things you can count. Less or least, things you don't count. That's kind of how I think of it. All right, you never use the word them as an adjective. You wouldn't say them boys. You would always say those boys. All right? All right. Number 1, them or those field peas are delicious. We never use them as an adjective. There were fewer or less people attending the meeting today. Well, we could count the people, so we would want to use the word fewer. That's the counting one. The diamond is the most brightest or the brightest. Well, we never use both. Never seem more wiser or wiser than the people you are with. Don't use ER and more. We have less or fewer money than we had last year. This is a tricky one. It says items that could be counted. Well, we could count the money, but if you look up here, it's a quantity of a substance. So we're talking about a quantity. We're not actually going to measure that or count it, we would kind of count it. That one's a little tricky, I have to admit. But if you listen to the sentence, you're going to pick the right one because one sounds right and one doesn't sound right. We wouldn't say we have fewer money, would we? We would say we have less money. So that one becomes easy just simply because we can hear it. Jack is smarter than anyone else or anyone. Now remember, we're comparing Jack to a group, his class. So we want to use the word else. I am doing the best or bestest work I've ever done. Wow, bestest is a lovely word, but it's not a real word. I really enjoy listening to those or them classical recordings. Them is not an adjective. Some people, and for instance, just to you might be looking at these words, these uses of them, and thinking, who would ever say that? But if you go down south, where I've lived, people say it like that. I think it's kind of a regional kind of colloquialism, they say, or a way people speak. And once again, if you're living in the South and somebody says them in that context, you're not going to want to correct them, because that's just the way some people talk. But we're mainly speaking of writing here. We want to write correctly. Some people think they have fewer or less opportunities. Now this is, we could count the opportunities. So I would say we use fewer opportunities. And I'm going to check because that sounds right, and I just want to make sure I'm correct. Yes. And you're thinking, how's that different than the money? Well, I don't know. Alexis plays chess better than anyone or anyone else. All right, this one's easy because we've learned that we want to use the else when we're comparing a person to a group. All right, let's go to 211. The following sentences contain errors in use of adjectives. Cross out any incorrect words and make corrections where necessary. So I'm going to do, let's say I do 10 of these with you, and then you can do the rest on your own. All right. We played better than any team in the tournament. So you're comparing us to another team or to another group. So we want to add the word other. It's either other or else, depending on what sounds right. Any other team. There is fewer food in this package than in that one. So this is not something we would actually count out, although maybe if you're talking cookies, you might want to count them. But then you would say there are fewer cookies, right? But food is not something necessarily we would count, so we would say less. I am a more faster reader than my sister. Well, you may be, but you don't want to use more and ER, and the word fast does best with the ER. I am faster. You can hear it. The Nile is the most longest. Once again, we don't use EST and most. Mr. Harris likes to ride them thoroughbred horses. It would be those. And like I said, the way we speak up here, you can just hear it. There are less tires on those trucks than on those buses. Now, you definitely can count tires. So you would want to say fewer. My spelling grades are worser than my language grades. Oh, I hope they're not. They are worse. You don't add ER. It's bad, worse, and worst. This joke is more funnier than Justin's. It's just funnier. The duck hawk is the most fastest bird, just fastest. You will have to be more carefuler when you check your work. Careful does not use the E. Would you say carefuler? It's even hard to say. You would say more careful. So let's get rid of that ER. And once again, you don't use both, so you pick one or the other, and you can usually hear it. All right, so now you're going to do 11 through 25 on your own, and hopefully I'm waking up a bit, and I will start page 212 in just a minute with you. Have a good day.